Live from the TV30 studio, here is Jim Schneider.
Well, hi there and welcome to inFocus. We're glad that you've joined us tonight as we talk about issues that are impacting all of us here in southeast Wisconsin and across the nation as a whole. Just before we introduce our guest and topic for tonight, we would like to take a moment just to express our sympathies, our condolences tonight to the family of Robert Brown. He went home to be with the Lord this past Wednesday, November 16th. Bob made many appearances right here on the inFocus program through the years, as well as on various radio programs. This, matter of fact, is a picture of him in our radio studio. Bob was a very strong advocate for the pro-life cause, standing up for the preborn, also an advocate for moral issues in the community. But this past Wednesday, the Lord called him home. Visitation being held Tuesday. Pastor Matruella that will be officiating at his funeral service. But one of the original 17 of the missionaries to the preborn here in southeast Wisconsin. And so while there is sorrow, there is not sorrow as those who have no hope, because we know Bob had trusted Jesus Christ as his Savior and his home with the Lord. As we turn our attention tonight, we understand that there is a new direction for the House of Representatives in Congress as Republicans have gained control of this chamber, albeit by a very narrow margin. Congressman Kevin McCarthy becoming the new Speaker of the House with the 118th Congress as it comes into session on January 3rd, 2023. So hearings have been promised on the Biden business dealings with China, further hearings going on border security and other issues, and also the aftermath here of the 2022 election. We have in our studio tonight Congressman Glenn Grothman, represents Wisconsin's 6th Congressional District, reelected now to his 5th term. Congratulations on that. Also, some major committee assignments you have. Oversight and Reform Committee is going to be a very important committee. A subcommittee on National Security, Education, Labor Committee, and Budget Committee. Good to have you back.
Great. Glad to be on the show as always.
Great. So before we talk about the critical issues going on in D.C. and some of the issues you're going to be involved in, let's ascertain your thoughts regarding the election. We were told it was going to be a red wave. Some have called it a purple trickle across the nation. Your perspective on what did or did not materialize?
It was disappointing in that so many people voted for the Democrat Party after they were so radical. I think of two races in particular. Ron Johnson won here in the state of Wisconsin. He won with like 50.5%. To me, Ron Johnson is one of the most accomplished senators up there. He's been there for 12 years. He has an incredible record. He's running against a guy who is just short of a Marxist. I mean, that an election that should have been 80-20 or something. He won with 50.5. The other one that sticks in my mind is the Pennsylvania election for U.S. Senate, where Fetterman won the race. He was a radical in the first place. In his personal life, he didn't even get a job, lived off his parents until relatively late in life, and more recently he had a stroke, so he was obviously impaired. Nevertheless, he won the race against, quite frankly, an articulate opponent. I've got to wonder about the American public if they couldn't get that Fetterman race right, and if 49.5% of the voters in the state of Wisconsin voted for Mandela Barnes. That's what concerns me. I'm a little bit afraid that the Republican Party did not tell the public what was at stake. They focused a lot on the economic issues, which is fine, but to me, we had the future of America at stake. And what was at stake was a lot more whether or not we had $4 $3 gas, or whether the Dow was at 34,000 or 31,000. They brought up crime, which is important, but I felt there were a lot of other issues that if the Democrats had gotten all three, they would have permanently changed America. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we talked about those issues.
What do you see as being those issues?
Well, freedom of speech. We had the Department of Homeland Security weighing in with the social platforms, Facebook and what have you, and saying, we don't want the American public to learn about certain things. I knew, and this was not the government, but I knew a guy who was permanently damaged because of the vaccines. You know, now his condition, it's known as a risk factor in Europe, In America, they deal with risk factors by shutting you off the internet. We had a bill pass the U.S. House saying that everyone in the country had to, on the census form and 130 other government forms, list a sexual preference. I mean, can you imagine here in America in which maybe the teacher or parent fills out the form, but you're going to ask a 5-year-old or probably have the child himself fill it out if he's 10 or 11 years old, what is your sexual preference? Are you transgender? Are you gay? Can you believe that's happening in America? Wasn't dealt with. We had the FBI show up at the doors of people who spoke up at school board meetings. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is something you'd expect would happen in Red China. This is what's at stake. Do we want an America in which the FBI is monitoring what you say, for all I know, at a county board meeting, at a school board meeting, and if you're saying something that's politically correct, well, maybe we'll be here to question you. Kind of the whole anti-family movement. We know in the last election the Democrats were heavily supported by Black Lives Matter, which made no bones about it. They wanted to get rid of the traditional family. Mm-hmm. I mean, how can a party survive once you do that? But again, no penalty was paid. I think the border, getting all people across the border who were not appropriately vetting. John Adams said we need a moral and religious people for America to be great. Are we checking the people at the border? No. Was that issue used? Maybe it was issued maybe in Texas or Arizona, but it affects all Americans. There's another issue that was kind of left on the side. And when you have all these other issues left on the side, I think the American public had almost voted voted for the end of America.
Why were Republicans reluctant to talk on these issues?
Well, what they do is they say they do a poll, and they ask you, what is the most important issue to you? And of course, because probably today you filled up with gas, maybe you went food shopping, you say inflation. They say, well, that's the most important issue to Jim. We're going to run ads on inflation. Mm-hmm. And maybe number 2 is crime. But these other issues are arguably more important, and the public has to be educated that these are incredibly important issues. And I think once you explain it to the public will say, well, yes, we can't have the government suppressing information. We can't have the government showing up to harass people who show up at a school board meeting. And I think then we can't have 14-year-old children be expected to fill out forms on their sexual preference. And once these issues are thrown out there, mm-hmm. I think then the public would realize what's at stake and be either more likely to vote Republican or at least less likely to vote Democrat. So sometimes you got to tell people what the important issues are because they aren't hitting them in the face every day like, say, inflation was, which is important, but we're losing our freedoms here.
Do you believe that big tech and the media was very culpable in forming these opinions?
Well, they didn't. They obviously don't focus on a lot of issues, mm-hmm. and that's a problem. I would say just not big tech. I think part of the problem is the mainstream media, right? If you're going to get your news from MSNBC or something, that's a problem as well. But I think the Republicans have to do a better job of, like I said, driving people's opinion. I think what the Democrats did, I'm not sure abortion was that important, but somehow they did polling and found out that sadly, and we'll talk about this later in the show, right now the average American is not anti-abortion. And once they discovered that, they tried to educate the public that that is the most important issue. And sadly, they persuaded a lot of people, particularly young people, that the most important thing is to have your congressman or governor or whatever be pro-abortion. Now, that is horrible. I think I'll condemn the churches for allowing that to happen. Mm-hmm. But the Democrats took an issue that I don't think was perceived to be a number one issue, put it on TV again and again and again, and lo and behold, a lot of people decided, well, yes, we can't vote for Tim Michels, the gubernatorial candidate here in Wisconsin. We couldn't vote for him because he's pro-life. I've decided that is my number one issue, not the border, not inflation, not crime, not fentanyl. Mm-hmm. And I think the Republicans as well have to educate the public on these important issues.
So is this something that, I mean, you've reconvened in D.C. with many of your colleagues? Are discussions going on regarding these issues?
I don't think the degree to which they should. I think the attitude in Washington is that, first of all, we look at the House itself, because I'm part of the House, and we say, well, the House, we did pick up, by the time it's over, 8 or 9 seats. The Senate lost a seat. We lost a lot of governors' races we expected to win. So when you compare the House of Representatives to the U.S. Senate or the Republican governors, we weren't bad. We should be happy with what happened. And to me, you look at some of these bills that are going to become law. Puerto Rico would become a state. The District of Columbia would become a state. You'd get rid of photo ID in elections. If the Democrats had, picked up 5 more or 4 more, depending how it works out, U.S. House seats, we're almost to the point where it's the end of America as we know it. And I think that should have been
what percentage of your colleagues on your side of the aisle would hold those views? That they feel so strongly about these issues you're talking about? Because there are those that are seeming to want to compromise in some of these areas.
Well, they want to compromise, but what scares me is they're not educating the public that are even issues at all. I mean, that's the scary thing. And does the public care? Does the public care because the average person doesn't show up at a school board meeting? Does the public care if the FBI is keeping track of you that you do show up at a school board meeting? I would hope the average American cares about that. Whether they do or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Congressman Glenn Grothman with us here tonight with some discussion just 2 weeks after the election right now.
Yes.
And seeing some of the ramifications. Some of the races are still held out there. And that brings up another aspect of this, and that is the whole voting process that is going on in our country. I know one piece of legislation wanted to, and I believe it was H.R. 1, was to federalize the elections. And as we take a look, still the inconsistencies, like in Maricopa County, Arizona right now, so many of the tabulators non-functional in Republican-leaning areas. Do you have concerns regarding the integrity of this vote, whether it was in Pennsylvania, to see what happened there, or are you pretty satisfied that we saw a fair, honest vote?
We're always concerned because of the proliferation of absentee voting. There was a time, I'm sure most of your listeners know, in the state of Wisconsin, where you needed a reason to vote absentee. I have 2 concerns on absentee voting. First of all, we never really know who filled out that ballot, right? Somebody else could fill it out for somebody, say, you sign it or I'll sign it or whatever. Secondly, we don't know if that person was being coached. I don't know what the totals are this time around. I know 2 years ago in Arizona, I believe at least 80 and maybe over 85% of the ballots were absentee ballots. If there was elections, say, in the Soviet Union, and we said 85% of the ballots are absentee ballots, we would question that election, right? For the reasons I mentioned. We don't know. That is becoming more and more the norm in the United States, and it's of concern. I'm not saying somebody cheated, but the ability to cheat is obviously there. Show up at somebody's door, have you filled out your absentee ballot, can I help you, whatever. That's a possibility, and very difficult to determine if that happened, but it clearly could have happened. And I think as long as we have so many absentee ballots, you have to be concerned. I'll put it that way.
We do, and again, video has surfaced of the drop boxes, like in Arizona too, where cars pulling up and just stuffing multiple ballots from a single person in a vehicle, and that issue really does need to be addressed.
It's going to be very difficult. They changed the law, and I believe it was the year 2000 in the state of Wisconsin. Obviously, very common in Arizona right now. And may take federal legislation to change it, because I think some of these states that have so many absentee ballots, I don't know whether the Republicans will ever be able to get in charge. We know the Democrats are trying to federalize elections going the other way. They want to get rid of photo ID. I mean, I need a photo ID to get on an airplane. I guess for some medications you need a photo ID. Are those things less important than voting? I don't know. Nobody complains about that. So the idea that we are that close to getting rid of photo ID nationwide, I mean, I think we would be getting rid of it probably if we had,
Congressman, if I'm getting rid of waste motor oil from an oil change, I have to show a photo ID at the waste station. Libraries, to get a Curious George book, you show your photo ID in order,
Right, and the idea that we could get rid of that nationwide, and we're just a few congressmen away from that, which tells you in 2 years from now, if we lose a little bit, all this stuff will become law, including no photo ID. The American public has to know what a disaster it would be. 2 years ago, we hung on because of something called the filibuster rule, and 2 out of 50 Democrat senators said we're not going to bring a bill forth unless we have 60 votes. And they, I guess, kind of saved America. They've got to hang on for another month and a half now. This time, what's going to save America is we happen to get the House of Representatives with 221, 222 votes. We needed 218. And hopefully we'll maintain that majority for the next 2 years. People die, sometimes people don't show up. So we're going to have to hold on to that majority, and really won't be able to do a lot of positive things with such a small majority, but at least prevent more bad things from happening. And then hopefully we get a good constitutional president 2 years from now who can educate America what it takes or why our country is great, and begin to move America back on the right track.
One thing it also does, we'll get into later in our interview, is the chairmanship of all the committees and determine what goes on there. But let's hit another election issue, and that is the matter of abortion. We saw 5 states having this on the ballot: Michigan, California, Vermont, just really just striking at the heart of the preborn child with the laws that they passed. Kentucky and Montana had the ability to stop abortion from taking place and to enshrine it in that regard, and they failed to get the votes. Montana, even on babies that were born alive after an attempted abortion to save their lives, that failed as well. Where are we at on this issue?
Well, the question is, where's the American public at? And this is a scary thing. Prior to Roe v. Wade, and we're going back to the 1960s, the early 70s here, it was widely understood in America that abortion was wrong. And that was before we had ultrasounds, right? Right now, everybody's got the ultrasounds. They know what's going on here. So I'm gonna point a little bit of blame here at the churches. And, we knew that this court decision was coming down, 6 months ago? The churches had plenty of time to educate the public on what the moral thing to do is. You look at that preborn baby, you see what a miracle it is. And despite that, the American public, despite all the ultrasounds out there, compared to when Roe v. Wade came down in the 50 intervening years, and I think most of the problems have been in the last 10 to 15 years, the churches have kind of dropped the ball. And it's very scary for those of us who had been hoping on more pro-life legislation around the country, but you're not going to get that legislation if the public is not there. Kansas is what I always considered a very conservative state, right? It was on the ballot in Kansas a little while ago, and the pro-lifers, they're the ones who wrote the referendum. You can't say that people were confused. And America, in a decline here, in a moral decline, said we don't care. And I think the clergy, the churches have to get down and think, what are we doing wrong, or are we not doing anything at all, which is really what I think is going on.
Speak to the clergy members who say, well, we're not to be involved in political issues.
This is a moral issue. When somebody decides whether they're pro-life or not, it's not just how you're going to vote. I could argue that that's secondary. The most important thing is if you're in that position, if you have a daughter who's in that position, if you have a college roommate in that position, what stand are you going to take, right? And if the clergy are mute, they're going to take the wrong side, particularly because right now the popular culture is obviously pro-abortion. The Hollywood element, the news element. Who's going to fight back? I mean, I think, quite frankly, most politicians, at least Republican politicians, they fought back. Almost all my colleagues at one time or other attend press conferences, speak about the importance of the preborn, speak about how quickly that little child grows, the heartbeat, that sort of thing. I mean, the politicians have done more than I would think politicians would normally do to weigh in. To me, it's the clergy. Now, we have another problem, and that is over time, less and less Americans are even believing in God, which is another big problem. And I happen to be a Republican, if your listeners don't know. I In the 1960s, about 2% of America said they were atheists, whatever that 2%. So 98% believed in God. Not Jesus Christ, who knows what they believe, but at least 90% answered, I believe in God. Right now, that number is down to about 82%. You have about 18% atheists. And I think the less God-fearing America becomes, the more we have a huge problem. Right? John Adams said America's fit for a moral and religious people, totally unfit for anyone else. Mm-hmm. Well, if we begin to lose our religious, our faith in God, if we begin to lose our morals, our country will, be on a fast road to corruption. I will point out, as far as the Republican Party is concerned, about 8% of the people who register Republican, and that's in states where you do register. We don't register here in Wisconsin. But 8% of the people who register Republican say they're atheist. 28% of the people who register Democrat say they are atheists. And I'm told that those numbers get greater if you have younger people. So that's a huge problem. And it doesn't surprise me that the more atheist you are, the more you vote for the party of rebellion. I frequently feel that, to a degree, the Democrat Party, which right now is just saying we need fundamental changes in this country, I think it's not surprising that people who are more unhappy are more likely to say we need fundamental changes. And I do think people who are atheist, I've never been an atheist, but I would think people who are atheist are almost by definition more unhappy. I mean, can you imagine what it would be like to believe that, humans just came about after a bunch of molecules ran into each other and we progressed from amoebas to whatever.
From goo to you.
Bugs. Right. I mean, you certainly have to have a very gloomy view of the world, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Democrats do so well with the atheist element. But as the atheist element continues to grow in this country, as apparently it is, that's a greater problem. And I think the clergy also have to ask themselves, why am I failing there? You've got such an exciting story, of God. You have more evidence than ever before in our history. I mean, when Darwin was around, they didn't even know the human cell existed. So we have more evidence of God all the time. But instead, the churches are, either because they are putting out boring sermons or are afraid to educate the public, and there are individual churches that are growing, but the number of people believing in God is dropping on down. Now, one of the effects of that, I think, is you're going to have more victories for the Democrat Party, because we're talking about politics tonight. But of course, the greater concern is we have a more immoral, less God-fearing populace in America, with all the bad things that come with it. I think also probably more depression, more crime, what have you.
So let me bring up another issue. Last summer, the House passed H.R. 8404, the so-called Respect for Marriage Act. This is something that would codify the Obergefell Supreme Court decision. 47 of the Republican colleagues in the House decided to vote with the 220 Democrats and pass this. Went over to the Senate. They put a stall on it at that time. Did not have the votes, but waited for the lame duck session. And we saw just a week ago, 12 Republican senators abandoned traditional marriage and values and voted on the bill to join with the Democrats. Two bills are different from the House passed the Senate. It's going to come back to the House again for concurrence and to the Senate for final votes. What's happening with that? I mean,
Well,
again, it's striking at traditional marriage, biblical marriage, where God had sanctioned marriages between a man and a woman.
Well, again, to you and me, it's obvious. But again, I'm going to put a little bit of blame here on the clergy. Politicians like to get reelected. Now, right now, the gay movement, whatever you want to call it, they are proselytizing everywhere, and the churches are largely mute, and this is what we get. I mean, I talk to a lot of people, and I've got to say, we've gone from, when I was originally involved in politics, maybe 25 years ago, this would have been automatic. The idea of gay marriage, would have, very few clearly under half the public would be for it anyway. Now things have turned around. Why is that? Because I think the clergy have been quiet on the issue. Actually, there's some clergy who have been very vocal, but they've been for it. And as the result, politicians who, after all, have to get reelected, they are saying put their finger up to the wind and say, well, if I'm going to stay around, I've got to vote for this bill. And again, I think on any individual church, and I hope we have some clergymen listening to this program, they have to sit back and say, what have I not done that we are here in America? Because that's the greater concern. I mean, if you look at the polling data on this, the polling data is not the way you and I would like. And it's changed overwhelmingly in the last 25 years. And I think that's because the popular culture, some churches, the news programs are all, go for this. And if nobody's fighting back, what do you wind up having? You wind up having a situation in which...
Congressman Mark Pocan on the Upfront program this past weekend indicated that he believes as it comes back to the House, there's going to be another 20 Republicans that will jump on board on that.
I think 20 more is a lot, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 10 or 12. And of course, every Democrat will be for it. So you have a shift in belief in Americans, and I know a lot of good churches out there that are articulating the other, but not loudly and not articulately. And I think, again, the clergy in this country have to step back and say, I'm getting well paid for this job, whatever, what am I doing? How is this happening on my watch?
Yeah. They have to recognize who they're accountable to.
Correct.
Congressman Glenn Grothman with us here this evening on inFocus as we examine not only this past election, but now some of the results of that as well, because there's going to be a changeover in the House of Representatives. Speaker Pelosi not seeking a leadership position at this point. Representative Hakeem Jeffries has launched a bid to take this position. He has called pro-lifers a threat and yahoos for believing that babies in the womb deserve to be protected from violence. Also blasted pro-lifers as being extreme on reproductive freedom.
Well, I've said all along, while I disagree with Nancy Pelosi on almost everything, I'd be very critical of her. I've said that when Nancy Pelosi goes, we're going to get a more liberal Democrat to replace her. And that's what we're going to find out here.
Wow.
Hakeem Jeffries from New York is... I'm sure many people on this show are very mad at Nancy Pelosi and have a very low opinion of her, as they should. But Hakeem Jeffries will be more left-wing across the board than Nancy Pelosi, I believe, which tells you where the Democrat Party is. Nancy Pelosi, I think, is probably, if you had to divide the Democrats up and down, conservative, liberal, I would think she's on the conservative half of Democrats. The way she thinks, and
that's quite a statement.
It is, but I think it's true. To a certain extent, maybe because of her age, I don't know. But I think Hakeem Jeffries will be solidly more left-leaning than Nancy Pelosi, and that's who's going to be leading the Democrat Party. He's going to be the minority leader for now, but if they get the majority in 2 years, he'll be the speaker with all his left-wing baggage, and he will be pushing a more radical agenda, I'm sure, than Nancy Pelosi is pushing.
So last week, Congressman Jim Comer of Kentucky expects to be chair now of the House Oversight Committee. That is assumed. But he made a statement. You were there at the event, surrounded by members of the committee, and talked about doing an investigation on the Biden family. We're going to play just a brief clip from that. I know you're kind of standing off to the right to him on this. I don't believe you're on screen on this particular one, but let's hear this clip of Congressman Jim Comer.
This is an investigation of Joe Biden, the President of the United States, and why he lied to the American people about his knowledge and participation in his family's international business schemes. National security interests require the committee conduct investigation, and we will pursue all avenues that have long been ignored. Committee Republicans have uncovered evidence of federal crimes committed by and to the benefit of members of the president's family. These include conspiracy or defrauding the United States, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, violations of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The Biden family's business dealings implicate a wide range of criminality, from human trafficking to potential violations of the Constitution. In the 118th Congress, this committee will evaluate the status of Joe Biden's relationship with his family's foreign partners and whether he is a president who is compromised or swayed by foreign dollars and influence. I want to be clear. This is an investigation of Joe Biden, and that's where the committee will focus in this next Congress.
You sit on this committee.
Correct. It's a very important investigation. We're a little bit afraid that the American public is going to say, we want to deal with the problems of America. Why are you dealing with the past, perhaps criminal behavior of the president and his son? Well, it's very relevant. If the president is compromised, for example, first of all, if there's a concern that he personally profited from this, which by itself is criminal. Secondly, if he did anything wrong, you can be sure that not only the Ukrainians, the Russians, the Chinese know about it, which means he's compromised. We have a president we cannot trust to deal with these countries and many other foreign countries around the globe. Okay.
Karine Jean-Pierre addressed this. I'm going to play this clip, and then we'll have you further comment on this.
Okay.
She was asked at a press conference last week regarding the focus of this committee oversight hearing.
One last question. The top Republican on the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Comer, has said that he's investigating the president's involvement in his son Hunter's foreign business dealings. Looking for your reaction to that, and then on the merits of the allegations, can you address whether the president was involved in any of his son Hunter or his brother's foreign business dealings?
So look, there's a little bit of interesting, kind of on-brand thinking here, because Congressional Republicans ran saying that they were going to fight inflation. They said they were going to make that a priority. They were very clear about that these past several months, and instead, what they're doing is they're focusing, they're making their top priority. They get the majority, and their top priority is actually not focusing on the American families, but focusing on the president's family. They're not coming up with solutions on how we're going to lower costs for American families. They're not coming up with solutions on how we're dealing with issues that matter the most to American families.
Okay, so she's kind of mirroring what you were just saying here, that there was no concern about all the investigations they've launched into former President Trump, and that being the focus of their hearings and so forth. But now that it's against her boss, she's singing a different tune.
Well, right. First of all, your listeners have to know there are two committees that are going to be holding hearings, not only concerning the Bidens, but concerning things like the FBI and the degree to which they have become more politicized. It will be the Oversight Committee, of which I'm a member, and the Judiciary Committee. Jim Jordan, who some of your listeners are familiar with, is the chairman of that committee. There'll be another 9 or 10 committees out there dealing with America's problems. Okay, I'm on the Education Committee.
So you're saying the House can walk and chew gum at the same time?
Right, exactly. And I think the Democrat narrative, rather than say that Joe Biden is 100% honest or close to 100% honest, they're going to say, well, we shouldn't worry about the fact that the president may be compromised and that he could be blackmailed by the Chinese or the Ukrainians. That's not of importance. We should be dealing with inflation. Well, on the Budget Committee, we're going to do what we can to rein in the government spending that has resulted in this inflation. There are, like I said, many government committees that are going to be holding hearings on these sort of problems. But when you have this much potential corruption, when you have an FBI that has become politicized, that's very important as well. And it's not too much to ask that at least 2 of the committees in Congress be holding hearings along these lines.
Yeah, does Congress, the House, have authority to pull funding from the FBI? We're not allocating any funding for XYZ?
There are a lot of agencies right now which are very bad, and I think the FBI has huge problems. I hope our negotiators, when it comes to putting together the appropriation budgets. I hope our negotiators are very tough on the FBI. It is very scary if the FBI becomes political. We talked earlier in the show about the FBI investigating people who show up at school board meetings. It's apparent the FBI may be participating in putting out things that are not true with regard to their political enemies, namely former President Trump. And it may also be true that the FBI is, they're suppressing things that may be critical of President Biden. We talked about earlier in the show the Department of Homeland Security, another governmental agency, leaning on social media platforms not to tell the American public things that are going on with regard to immigration. So we have a politicized bureaucracy right now, which is another way to ruin America. And we've got to have hearings to educate the American public. I hope the American public understands the danger of a politicized FBI, that the FBI in this country, at least at the top, maybe not at the bottom, but at least at the top, seems more concerned about protecting President Biden than about doing the things that we expect the FBI to do.
Raids on the homes of pro-lifers at gunpoint. I mean, it's been horrendous to see some things happening.
Unbelievable. I mean, and that's the type of issue that should have been brought up during the campaign.
Yeah.
You know, the American public should not have gotten confused with some of these negative ads. They should have said, we are approaching the type of government that the U.S. is not, that is more in line with a totalitarian state, both with the strong atheist tilt and with regard to a totalitarian sort of government where the governmental agencies seem, to a certain extent, feel compelled to protect the current regime.
I know another issue that you've been very concerned about personally, and I believe your committee will have oversight hearings as well, as dealing with our border and border security. I want to play a brief clip from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, where he's calling for mass amnesty to take place. Let's watch the clip and have you comment.
Now more than ever, we're short of workers. We have a population that is not reproducing it on its own with the same level that it used to. The only way we're going to have a great future in America is if we welcome and embrace immigrants, the dreamers, and all of them, because our ultimate goal is to help the dreamers, but get a path to citizenship for all 11 million or however many undocumented there are here.
He made a statement, we need more immigration because Americans are not reproducing, as he is backing every child-killing move, basically, by means of abortion here across this land. But your response, he's saying, let's give amnesty to 11 million or however many million we have.
Well, first of all, he's not distinguishing between people who are coming here legally, and there are many visas available for people who want to come here and work, and people coming here illegally. And there's a huge gap. I happened to attend this week a ceremony over at State Fair Park here in West Dallas, in which over 100 people were sworn in as new citizens. They all did it legally, and that was fine. Nobody's questioning that. We were told by the people who organized the ceremony that last year they thought perhaps for the first time, at least the first time in a long time, we had over 1 million new people sworn in as Americans last year, which is kind of an incredible thing. And even here in Wisconsin, we're having, more and more people sworn in. The problem that Chuck Schumer has is he can't distinguish between legal and illegal. And if he wants to introduce a bill and say rather than have 800 or 900,000 people come here every year, we can up that by a couple 100,000, he's free to do that. But it is just preposterous to say that we should be taking anybody who wanders across the border. We've got the greatest country in the history of the world. Everybody wants to come here. Why don't we pick them? Rather than, right now, Venezuela claims that they're sending their criminal element here. Is that the way to save America? I'll tell you, I've been down at the border many times. You mentioned that. And a little while ago, I wanted to go down to the New Mexico, El Paso area again. The congresswoman from down there who hosted me before coming down there said, I'm sorry, I don't think we should have any congressmen down here right now. I can't guarantee it's safe.
Wow.
Think about that.
Wow.
They can't even guarantee a congressman is safe if they go down and look at the area around El Paso, New Mexico, that area. So isn't that illuminating? It doesn't bother Chuck Schumer at all. If you look at all the things that party is doing, be it unlimited immigration, be it unlimited spending, which will put the value of the dollar at risk, the seeming not caring about the massive amount of fentanyl that comes here, and all the families who have broken hearts because their sons or daughters or spouses or whatever have died of the fentanyl, not caring there. It's like they want to ruin America. I would hope all of your listeners understand we cannot take our future immigrants by whoever wanders across the border. For
2.2 million apprehensions of illegal aliens in the last fiscal year. And then we talk also about the number, 98 apprehensions of suspected terrorists in the last fiscal year.
Another problem, there are rumors out there that people are coming across here from countries that are not traditionally friendly to the United States at all. Mm-hmm. And that they are not just coming here to escape those countries. There are rumors that once they come here, they would have the ability to damage the United States. Wow. And that's another problem we have when we don't enforce the border. And by the way, if you aren't going to maybe get involved in the budget that much, but we're working on both the budgets for the year beginning October 1st, in other words, a couple months ago, a month and a half ago, and we'll soon be working on the budget for the year beginning October 1st, 2023. The Biden administration is not making the border a priority at all, mm-hmm. which means they're just allowing things for people who may be public charge coming here, maybe criminal coming here, maybe bringing drugs here, and seemingly doesn't care at all. That's the future of America, by the way.
Congressman Glenn Grothman with us tonight. I've got more to discuss, but friends, let's open the phone lines, give you opportunity as well. If you have a question you would like to ask or a brief comment, our phone number 414-935-3030. 414-935-3030, toll free. You can reach us at 1-800-733-8830. That's 1-800-733-8830. If you'd like to text in your question or brief comment, you may do so by including your first name and the community that you are sending it from, and text it to 414-439-3585. 414-439-3585. Congressman McCarthy has vowed to hold congressional hearings at the border, and it appears there's going to be a massive migration coming across now because Title 42 has just been uplifted by a judge saying it's arbitrary and capricious. We got some big problems coming up ahead.
Well, we have a couple of problems. First of all, Article 42 meant we could hold people back because of COVID. Mm-hmm. And it's been happening for quite a while now. First of all, we have a ridiculous ruling by a federal judge. And I think over time, maybe the most important thing a president does is his judicial appointments. Mm-hmm. And if you have an activist judge who, in this case, I think wants to destroy America, why else would you reach such a conclusion? It's a huge problem. Now, I'm not sure who appointed that judge in the first place, but it shows that when you elect a president, that the judges that president appoints, they may be hanging around creating problems 10, 20, 30 mm-hmm. years later. Obviously, a huge problem. It means more and more people come here. And the more the border is open, the word gets out around the mm-hmm. world that now you should come here. Mm-hmm. Most of these people, they have to pay the Mexican drug cartels to come here. Well, the Mexican drug cartels say we need $5,000 or $8,000 or $15,000 to come here. So what happens is, if they can come here, the cartels, they advertise on social media around the world. Now is the time to come to the United States. Mm-hmm. That decision by that judge, I'm sure the Mexican drug cartels just loved it. I'm sure they're educating people around the globe, come here to America now.
Friends, let's go to the phone lines. Again, we'll keep the numbers on the screen, 414-935-3030, to text in your question or brief comment, 414-439-3585. Caller, go ahead. You're on the air with Congressman Grothman.
Yes, I wanted to ask, why aren't all the Republicans in all levels of government screaming bloody murder on the elections because of similar results using the same machines? And then the other thought there is that this Attorney General in some state wants to investigate ticket sales for a concert, and they don't investigate Phil Haney's death from Homeland Security. They dragged their feet, the FBI. I believe it was they say suicide, but I think it was more a murder from the evidence that was...
Okay, I tell you what, you're going way across the board here, but let's deal with this issue pertaining to our topic this evening.
Well, we had really hoped to change the election law in the state of Wisconsin if Tim Michels had won the governorship. And I think that was maybe the most important reason, maybe, arguably, why we wanted him to win. We've introduced bills in Congress. I've introduced a bill to try to rein in the out-of-control absentee voting. The frustrating thing is we don't have the presidency, we don't have the governorship. We may or may not hold hearings on some of these issues in Congress. I'm not a chairman of a committee that would do that, but it wouldn't be surprised me if they hold hearings. As you know, on a state level, they spent, I believe, over $1 million on an investigation on the last election.
Kelly in Mayville, you're on the air.
I just have a comment. I think that we need to pray to God for help, because I believe that we're in a spiritual warfare with the devil, of course, and his angels, and he's using technology, I believe, and I think God can counter anything the devil can do. So that's my comment.
Okay.
Well, I did say we're in a moral and spiritual problem right now. You know, we have a situation in which the number of people, self-identified atheists, keeps growing. And as we continue to lose our faith in God in this country, we're going to have a bigger problem. So I think we have to pray for a more religious, more Bible-believing electorate, which first of all is good in its own right, overwhelmingly, but secondly, to get back the type of country that we are supposed to have. We earlier this show quoted John Adams. We need a moral and religious people, and we are slipping from that. We have to repent. This country has to repent, but to repent, I think you have to be a more educated people and realize what you have to repent from. And that's what we need. But you're right, we have to pray to God. He has given us another 2 years as we hang on in the House of Representatives to get our act together, and hopefully we'll get a good president 2 years from now, and we can march back to the type of country our forefathers envisioned.
What do you think about Donald Trump announcing his re-election bid?
You know, I worked very hard for Donald Trump, and I think some of the things he's done since he left office are not very conservative, which is of concern to me. A couple times he backed candidates that were clearly not the conservative candidate. He was backing the more liberal candidate. And I was hoping that he would recognize that some of the things he had done made it very difficult to get people to vote for him. I mean, I certainly tried to get all the votes I could for him 2 years ago, and there were some people who just wouldn't go there. Now, in the last month, he has continued on the path of calling people names. And you could say, well, he's a businessman or what have you, but as somebody who's tried to get him votes, that's not helpful. And we cannot afford to lose the election in 2024. I attended a rally for Ron DeSantis in Green Bay. He showed up for Tim Michels a couple months ago. He was fantastic, just fantastic. You sometimes hear Glenn Youngkin on TV. He's impressive. And as people decide what they want to, who they want to have our nominee, by that I mean the Republican nominee, a year and a half ago, I would see if you can find something by Ron DeSantis online and see what you think about it. Didn't call anybody any names, nothing there that you had to, oh, well, you know, I think maybe some of the people who we could not get on our side last time would be on our side with somebody like that.
Brad in West Dallas, good evening. You're on the air.
Hey, Brother Jim.
I wouldn't be so hard on the voters regarding this last election. That red tsunami was coming. It was going to happen, but it was circumvented. There was a lot of shenanigans that were going on. Court decisions saying you have to accept ballots 6 days after Election Day. I think that was Fetterman's campaign that filed that lawsuit. You still had ballot harvesting and illegal drop boxes, mail-in ballots, and never saw the inside of an envelope. Court denying an extension of voting hours where machines didn't work earlier on Election Day. Some people didn't even vote because of that, because it was too much messing around. The whole thing is still on the internet, which leaves it open to hacking. And why does it take 10 to 12 days to count ballots? This whole thing stinks.
Brad, thank you for the comments.
I will agree with you. In California, this where we still don't know, and what are we? We're 13 days after the election. We still don't know. I talked to these congressmen in California who are on the edge, and believe it or not, they don't think they're being cheated out of anything. They feel that they're monitoring what's going on in California, and they're getting a fair deal. And if that's what the congressmen from California who are on the fence are saying, they're smart people, or at least the ones I talk to are.
Clearly, there's inconsistencies happening. We're seeing in Arizona.
Right. I would just say this, though. I talked to a lot of people, again, particularly to try to get them to vote for Tim Michels, to try to get them to vote for Ron Johnson. I am surprised the number of otherwise intelligent people who, for example, had a hard time distinguishing between Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes. They would look at the TV ads and it would confuse them. It shouldn't confuse them, but it did confuse them. I continue to get calls about Tim Michels. Is this true or is this not true? So part of it is there are a lot of really uninformed people out there. And I think if you're a listener, if he talks to different people, maybe where he works, maybe relatives or something, he may be surprised to find the number of people who seem to negotiate around our society in other ways are completely baffled by these TV commercials. And I think the conservatives and the Republicans have to do a better job of explaining what's at stake in the future, which is why earlier in this show we talked about all the issues that are of utmost importance that the Republicans did not use. And I think if they used them, we'd be in better shape.
Brad, thanks for the comment tonight.
Thank you.
We've got Frank next in Sheboygan. Frank, you're on the air.
Okay.
Frank, you're on the air. Please go ahead.
Okay, can I ask a question? Why don't our Republicans and our Democrats, instead of running each other down, get on TV and get out there and say, what can we do for the people? Not always criticizing one another. That's not helping our unity in this country. I'm a veteran of 69 years, and it's heartbreaking that we fought for freedom in this country, and these people that get a little power think that they are God.
Frank, thank you.
Every time you turn upon the things, I'm only saying is one thing. These people, every time you come up to anything that comes of discussion, it's we got to go to court, and when do the courts become God?
Thank you, Frank. You've raised some interesting issues here. Thank you so much for your service, Congressman.
Well, Frank, I'd like to thank you for your service as well. And I think we talk on this show about all the things the government is doing that I bet when you were in the service, you never would have dreamed the government was doing that. We don't like to talk about them. I don't, like to talk about the fact that we have open borders. I don't like to talk about over 100,000 fentanyl deaths a year. I don't like to talk about asking middle schoolers or high schoolers to declare their sexual preference, but that's where we are in America, and unless we talk about it, how do you know what's going on in Washington or Madison?
Thank you for the call. Al is next. West Dallas. Hi, Al.
Hi, Congressman Grossman and Jim. What's the chance of passing the Defense of Marriage Act before the new House people get in? Does it protect traditional marriage, one man and one woman? And what can we do to stop passage of it?
But that is going back to the House of Representatives. The Senate did pass it.
Correct. You can call your congressman. I think we kind of laid out here that it passed pretty overwhelmingly the first time it came through Congress. So I'd be surprised if that changes a lot, but you can call your congressman. Again, I think the deeper problem there is because it passed so overwhelmingly, you have to ask, I ask, where are the churches? You know, where are the churches as we went from, you know, one view of this issue to the other view of the issue?
Hilda in Milwaukee, you're on the air. Hello, Hilda?
Yeah.
You're on the air.
Okay. Why are you purging the Christian, the soldiers? Because they don't want the shots. And why do they have to?
There's another problem. And
tell you what, we're down to less than 2 minutes, so I'm going to have them address that issue.
I think it's possible, hopefully, Congress will address some of the concerns of these shots and create a situation in which there is more sympathy for people in the military or who work in the hospitals, for that matter, who don't get the vaccine. I mentioned earlier in the show a doctor from Mequon who was very damaged, and the way the government dealt with it, or the way that high tech dealt with it, was just to take him off the internet. It seems as though there's a lot more freedom of idea, freedom of expression in other countries compared to our country when it comes to talking about the vaccine.
Other texts coming in here this evening, too, again, concerned about illegals that are coming over in order to cast votes, and some are signing up for driver's license, etc.
Well, people always ask me, what can we do about the illegals? And we need to send a big message to Joe Biden and the Democrats that we're not going to have open borders. Sadly, that message was not sent. And if you have any friends out there who, you know, voted against Ron Johnson or what have you in the last election, you can say, this is what happens when we vote recklessly like that.
Congressman, we're going to have to leave it there tonight. Thank you for being with us.
Jim, thanks for having me on the show.
Congressman Glenn Grothman, again, you may contact his office, his website, grothman.house.gov, a DC number 202-225-2476, Fond du Lac office 920-907-0624. Our time is gone. Thanks for joining us tonight on inFocus. Good night.